Hey everybody, and welcome back to D-Ray's shop. Today here in the shop, we got this Yamaha Rhino. We're going to install a winch on it. So let's get started. I've got a winch all unpacked here, and I'll kind of go over all the components and what they do. Now, I realize this is a pretty good pile of wire and hardware and such, but it's really not all that complicated. Of course, we got our winch right here. It's rated at 3,500 pounds. One of the things I like about this setup is it has a free spooling hub option. So that way, when you get ready to use it, you can unlock the hub on it, pull out as much cable as you need, then lock it back in, and then you can go ahead and power it in. Now, here's our switches that operate the thing. Now, this switch here is, since it's set up for an ATV or a UTV, it's got like a universal handlebar mount on it. I'm going to do away with all that because I'm going to mount this in the dash somewhere. I'll have to figure out a neat way of mounting it where it looks good. But it's just got a rocker switch on it that powers it in or out. Now what this one does, this is a 12-foot remote with a little handheld rocker switch assembly on it. And what this is for is we have a receptacle here that we're going to mount on the front of the UTV somewhere. And if you're using this thing by yourself, you can take this, plug it in, and then you can be out in the front of the thing so that you can watch your cable, make sure you're not getting it fouled up and mess things up like that. So that's pretty neat. Now this is the contactor assembly. Now what this does is this is what actually powers the winch in or out. We'll have our battery and our ground wire hooked here. Then you have your blue and your yellow wire that hooks to the blue and yellow terminals on the contactor. And then it goes from there to the blue and yellow terminals on the winch. And the reason why they've got those color coded like that is so that when you push the button in, it actually puts it in the correct orientation where it runs it in or out. So what this thing actually does is when you power the winch, it applies power and ground to the winch motor and it runs it in one direction. Well, when you push the rocker switch in the opposite direction, it actually reverses the polarity of it, so it will allow the motor to work forwards and backwards. Now this is our roller fair lead mount, and what this does is you run your cable through here, and so if you're pulling off to an angle or up or down, it just gives the cable something to roll over where it doesn't foul the cable up. Of course, we also have the hook that goes on the end of the cable. We've got these little boots goes over the ends of the terminals to insulate them. And we've got our mounting hardware. Now this is the roller fair lead mount bracket. Now a lot of times I'll have customers that'll bring me a winch and their machine. They'll say, hey, I want you to put this on for me. And I'll say, well, did you get a mounting bracket? And they say, yeah, it's got one in it. And I'm like, well, no, this is actually just to mount the roller fair lead on. And then this bracket goes under the winch to attach it. Every application that you're liable to put this thing on is going to be a little different. So what you're going to have to do is go to your local dealer or get online and find you an aftermarket mounting bracket for your application. This particular one here goes on the Rhino 450 and 660s and 700s. What this thing does is this part here mounts to the frame. This part here mounts to the front of the bumper. Then your roller fair lead mount goes on here, then the winch goes on top of that. All right. And last but not least, this is our power wire that goes from the battery to the contactor. It's got some stuff on here that I like and I kind of don't like. It's got two 50 amp self-resetting circuit breakers. And that's pretty cool because if you was to get this winch in a bind and power it down to the point where it just stalls, you're going to trip these circuit breakers here and that'll save your winch and keep from burning it up. What I don't like about it is obviously you've got exposed electrical components here that can get up against the frame and short out, and that's not good. So what I did is I went down to the local hardware store and I got this little electrical box that's designed to put just like a single receptacle in or a toggle switch for like a light switch. And I cut a groove on each end of it. And this little assembly here just fits perfectly down in that. Then I've got just a blind cover that I'll attach over the top of it. And that'll effectively insulate the thing so it can't get up against something and short out. And I'll mount this to the frame or the battery box, just wherever it works out so where it looks real good. All right. So that's all of our components here. So let's start mounting this thing up. All right. Now what I've done here is I've kind of pre-assembled our winch and our winch mount. What I've done here is I've got the roller fair lead and I went ahead and put the hook on it. This is our roller fair lead mounting bracket, and this is the mounting bracket that's going to attach it to the UTV. Now what I've done is I went ahead and I tightened these two lower bolts down, but these two upper bolts, all I did was just start them to kind of help center the holes, because these bolts are also going to go through the bumper with these two bolts on the outside here. All this is going to go through the bumper assembly. This is going to attach to the frame. So now we're ready to attach this to the bumper. Now to make things a little easier to get at when we mount our winch and go to wiring it up, I went ahead and removed the hood, the front bumper cover, and the lower skid pan so we can get to all of our hardware a little easier. Okay, now I'm going to start putting the winch assembly in place. Get it kind of lined up with the mounting holes. Start putting our bolts in. Alright, well I got our winch all tightened down real good, and I went ahead and reinstalled the skid pan. So now I'm going to work my way up here to the battery box so I can figure out how I'm going to mount our contactor assembly and our circuit breakers. Here's our battery box. I'll zoom in and give you a little closer shot of it there. The first thing I'm going to do is take our cover off and set it aside. And then before I start doing any wiring on this thing at all, I'm going to disconnect our battery cable on the negative side. So that way we don't short anything out. Now I'm going to mount my contactor assembly. I'll zoom in here and show you a little closer shot of it. What I've done here is I marked and drilled me 2 holes in the side of the battery box. And I'm just going to stick the old contactor in there. Put another screw in. Like that. And now I'll tighten all this hardware up. Now I'm going to install our little circuit breaker box, and you can see inside here it's got a couple of bosses where you could drill holes for mounting it. So I just went ahead and used those two, and then I used that as a template and kind of put it where I wanted it on the battery box. Drilled the holes in the battery box, and so now put that in there just like that, and put our washers and nuts on it and tighten that down. That's pretty solid right there. So next I'm going to go ahead and install our battery wire and circuit breaker assembly. So now that I've got our circuit breakers all installed here, next I've got to take our positive battery cable here and run it inside the box and hook it up. Now what I've already done here is I've disconnected the main battery cable where it goes onto the starter relay down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill me a hole in the side of the battery box right about here. I'm going to route that cable in there, and then I'm just going to kind of mate it up with that one and put it right back down on the solenoid. That should have us a good connection. Alright, well I've got our power wire hooked up to our solenoid, and it was kind of hard to show it with the camera on the tripod, so I'm just going to kind of freehand it here, but you can see where I drilled that hole and passed that power cable through there. Then I just looped it around and just put it right in the same boot as the original battery cable going to the starter solenoid, and then tightened it all down, and now I just got to put my little boot over it. There we go. Now, yeah, see, it makes a real neat looking install there. I like that. Next we're going to run our battery cable from our circuit breakers to the red terminal on the contactor. Now as you can see here, we've got way more wire than we really need. And the reason why they do that is on an ATV application, typically your battery would be on the back of the machine. So you hook this up to your battery, and then you'd have to run this all the way up somewhere near the front of the machine, because this is typically where you put your contactor assembly. Now, there's a couple different ways we can do this. Since this already has a terminal on it, I could just coil this up and put it over by the frame somewhere and zip tie it up and just run me enough wire over here to get over onto the contactor. And you can do that, there's not a problem with that. The only thing I don't like about it, 2 things. One, it doesn't look very attractive. I mean, you got just a big mess of wire there that's really useless. Second thing is you know, when you're passing 12 volts through all of this excess wire, when you really put a load on your winch, you can actually get a power reduction going to the winch. It's like a voltage drop because of all the resistance in this extra wire. So what I'm going to do is I went down to the local electrical supply and got me some real heavy duty crimp-on terminals that are the right size for this wire and also fit the terminal ends here. So I'm just going to cut this thing to length, make it just the right length that I need for it, then I'll crimp a new end on it and get rid of all this excess wire. So I'm going to bring the wire up under the contactor and leave me plenty of playing room there, so I'm going to run it right about there. So I'll cut that off. Next we'll strip a little bit off here. Like that. I've got me a little piece of shrink wrap here to help insulate the end of our terminal end. I'll put a little terminal on like that. Take the old crimper. Good crimping. There we go. All right. Now I'll slide our heat shrink up over the end of it there like that. Shrink it down with a heat gun. There you go. Looks pretty good. Now I'm going to put my little terminal boot over the end of that thing to cover it up, just like that. And we'll attach it to our contactor assembly. Just going to wrap that up under. Put that down there.